No, yeah, they're fine. Oh, they're good. Okay.
No, we.
I hope we do a better job with answering questions after this.
Deb, just give me that pen back when you're
I was
done.
going to say, I was going to pass the pen down.
Apparently.
Give that to Ron.
All right, Megan, you want to get started while we're signing things?
Yeah, sure. All right.
We'll be getting more. I'm sorry for the delay.
Stephanie's handing out water. All right. Good morning and welcome. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Good morning. Welcome to this morning's discussion on making TOD real, planning and building transit-oriented development in New Jersey. I'm Megan Massey, Assistant Director of Transit-Friendly Planning at New Jersey Transit. This forum kicks off a series of discussions we are planning to have throughout the year to talk about a variety of topics related to TOD from a range of perspectives and practitioners. Today's focus is on how TOD is planned and built in New Jersey. I'm looking forward to hearing from today's panelists, a mix of developers and development and planning professionals, to learn more about their successes and challenges when it comes to creating TOD in our wonderful Garden State. You might be wondering how this forum series came to be, between the collaboration between Transit, Voorhees Transportation Center, and downtown New Jersey. As a bit of background, New Jersey Transit partnered with Rutgers VTC in 2005 to develop a transit-friendly newsletter. The newsletter was published a few times a year. It was for kept municipal officials, planners, advocates, all up to date on the potential for development and redevelopment around transit stations. Since then, the newsletter has evolved into a website that's full of fabulous resources, best practices, articles all related to DoD, both locally, internationally, nationally. It has it all. It also includes original content that was curated by VTC's staff and overseen by the editorial board, which some of you are a part of, and Courtney Mercer, our moderator for today's panels, is on the board as well. If you haven't already subscribed to the newsletter, I'd highly recommend you sign up to receive weekly news briefings. We are now up to weekly news briefings sent right to your inbox. Just go to njtod.org, or you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. In addition, since I'm here and I just want to plug everything away, in addition to njtod.org, Transit has had a transit-friendly program since 1999, where we assist municipalities in their planning for transit-oriented and transit-supportive development. We're really excited to announce that the transit-friendly program is getting an update, a revamp this year with our team with NV5 and their sub-consultants. We're building upon the existing success of the program, and we're going to be creating an easy, digestible online tool for all users to use and take to their communities when thinking about transit-friendly planning in their area. Again, you can receive updates, njtod.org. So stay tuned for all that exciting news. But now for what we are all here for, this wonderful lineup of panelists. Let me introduce you all. So Courtney Mercer is the Executive Director of Downtown New Jersey. She will be our moderator for today's session. Michelle Alonso is the Director of Planning and Redevelopment in Asbury Park, where there's a ton going on in terms of redevelopment and parking management. Carolyn Ehrlich is the Executive Director of the Woodbridge Township Redevelopment Agency, with over 20 designated redevelopment areas. Ron Bite is the CEO and founding partner of RBH Group and has done a tremendous job in Newark. Deb Tantliff is the founding principal of Tantum Real Estate. She just completed The Element, a fun, hip project in Red Bank, right by the Red Bank train station. And Steve Santola is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Woodmont Properties. His most recent project in Metuchen, near the Metuchen train station, transforming the area. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The bathroom is down the hall, and feel free actually to use your cell phones, keep them on silent, but if you want to take pictures, have little video snippets, we're actually going to be recording today's session, and we're hoping to get it on our website and YouTube. So, Courtney, take it away.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the introductions. We don't need to do them. I'm just going to jump right in. So today's session, we want to talk kind of from start to end planning for and implementing TOD. And you can see we have a nice mix. We have two public sector folks here and 3 developers to really give you the ins and outs. So let's start from the beginning, talking about how you engage community members in planning for TOD. When do you start the conversation and how do you get it going? I think I'd like to start with Carolyn and Michelle first, but the developers are welcome to
I'm raring to go, so it's good. Good. So each project has to have a different approach from the beginning to the end. I will probably be going to our Avenel Arts Village quite a bit. That was a contaminated, very contaminated site. It was a General Dynamics factory. And it, as awful as it was, it had been deserted for so long that nobody in the neighborhood really wanted to change, even though we found massive pollution in the area. And so what we did, we must have had up to 8 public meetings. But it was going to be an arts village, so we reached out to all of the artists in town and had them come to these public meetings. So when one of the locals got up and said something negative, one of the artists got up and said how great this is going to be, and so that they got to hear another side of the story, not just from the administration, but from people in their own neighborhood who would benefit from it. So that was, I think, it's a good approach to fill up the auditorium with people who are your friends, because the natural thing for anybody when it comes to TOD in their neighborhood is to push back. When you've had a very quiet neighborhood and all of a sudden somebody is coming downtown telling you you're going to have 6 or 7 stories in their backyard, you have to have friends there to help you talk about the benefits of that development.
Well, Asbury Park is in a unique situation in that it's, even though it's small, it's a city, it's urban, and that our area around our train station is adjacent to our CBD and our second large commercial district, which is Main Street, Route 71. So it's not difficult for people to see, yes, this is where more retail is going to go and apartment buildings, because the area already has a good deal of that. The part that I think some people push back on is the issue of the cars and the affordable housing aspect. Not to say in Asbury Park we've been very lucky in that a good chunk of the community has actually been pushing for more affordable housing and for more alternative transportation. But my experience in my career and working with other communities is that you need to start the dialogue with the constituency early and to do education programs and community meetings talking about why transit-oriented development, affordable housing, less cars is not bad and it's actually good. And when I worked in Newark, we had a very strong planning education campaign that was just not just meetings, but media materials, social media, descriptions on the website of of planning. And what is planning? What is the planning board? What is the zoning board? What is affordable housing exactly? And we also in Newark had what we called the planning roadshow. We would reach out to community groups in Newark, which are many, and say we would like to come to one of your meetings, and we want to talk about what is planning. And we had, I won't call it a game, but we had a layout, and we had blocks, and we talked about density and what does density look like, and other planning topics. And that was very key in having the average person who may never encounter the word zoning or zoning in their lifetimes understand what it is we do. And then we could take the next step and talk about other planning issues such as multimodal transportation and alternative transportation.
So from the developer's perspective, have you found that municipal efforts to engage the community early have either benefited, and there's some that are good, or their lack thereof, or they've done some things that actually made it harder for you when you came. Steve's smiling and laughing when you came in. If anyone wants to take either end of that kind of approach. Looks like Steve's very rare to go on that.
Just to the 2 points that were made, I think were fabulous, and we're lucky to have 2 towns here that really get it and that understand how to line up what's going to happen beforehand and utilize the tools that everybody has. What I look for equally is the stick-to-itiveness, right? So there's always going to be bumps in the road when you're making major changes, whether it's in Newark or Red Bank or Morristown or Cranford. And when you want to have an understanding that we're all in this together, and yeah, there may be tweaks, we may have to do adjustments, we may have to change certain aspects of the project ultimately to gain the full support we're looking for. You're always much more hesitant when the council's 3-2 and there's 2 people that are picking at you, and November's coming up, and the support seems somewhat tenuous that's been built by the municipality. The best example, and not just because they're here, but when we went to Metuchen, we were fortunate enough to win the RFP after the town had done all the hard work. We had frankly never really done that before. We had always been shoulder to the wheel with the municipality as part of the planning process and helping get the municipality and the neighbors on board. So if it's done the way Metuchen did it, when we went to planning board meetings and there were 6 people there for 270 apartment homes at the train line, they did some pretty good work, right? And Metuchen isn't Jersey City. So this was major change that they accomplished. But I think generally, if the town's involved before you at the very worst, you're going to get a nice roadmap of where the concerns are. And they're going to, even if they haven't resolved them all, they're going to hand you a list of, okay, here's the real troublemakers, here's the real problems we see. Don't worry about these 3 problems because those people are crazy, and we're not going to let them impact this particular project.
Yeah, I'll weigh in here. We actually, it's actually from a company standpoint, and when we're looking at the financial risk of a project, we're actually, when we're evaluating a project, we're going into the community right out from the outset, and we're actually. At this point, we're not even waiting for the municipalities to line up constituents. We are, as soon as we have a design, we have units, we have a sort of a program of what we want to build. We're getting out in front of the community. We find out who the community groups are. We get out, we have an open dialogue because we think there's a lot of risk in the process not doing so. And so from a financial standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. And we found that when we get that buy-in early, it actually facilitates our process later. Yes, we might have to change program at times, and yes, we might have disagreement with the community at some point, but there's an open dialogue that we're having, and people understand why we took our position, why we don't take our position. There's no doubt always some changes that are being made, but if it's early enough, it really, one, from our standpoint, from a risk standpoint, we sort of benefit from it. We think the community appreciates it, and when we get that buy-in, it actually expedites the process later on. And we found that that when the projects are actually built, the community has a sense of ownership. I mean, we almost look at it, we think about it internally as sort of open source, when you think about online open source communities, we view our projects as sort of, these open source projects that once you get that feedback early on, and once they have sort of their fingerprint in a project, it allows for a much easier process later on. And when it comes to lease up, you actually have a community that wants to see you succeed. And so it's really counterintuitive. It's, we as developers are generally afraid of sort of, getting pushback on our plan and so forth. But if it's early enough in the process, it's easy to make changes. And the earlier you get there in the process, it actually facilitates the process. So from a community outreach has been a major implementation of ours in our early stage of development, and we're constantly trying to think about how we get better and better at it, how we make sure we hit the groups, that we make sure that we're getting to the constituents that need to weigh in, and so it's become integral in our development process.
So at this point, our development groups basically hiring community engagement specialists. Do you have somebody? Is it going to get to that point where you're hiring someone to do this? Yeah.
There are groups out there. We've never used them. To me, it always depends on where you are. It seems almost like Disneylandish if you're running a real formula, because New Jersey is so hyper-local, and what works in Cranford or Red Bank isn't necessarily what Ron's looking for in Newark or Caroline's looking for in
Yeah, I
Woodbridge.
was just going to say that, Steve, that I don't know if a consultant knows the nature of the town, and every town has their own nature, so it's almost bringing in another problem if you bring in somebody who doesn't know the town. You know, I mean, the township's job is to help the developer understand the mood and help them get out there, but I see a benefit to a third party.
And a lot of times one of the first things they do, and what's so expensive, is they call in and they do actual like polling.
Right.
So that they can bring to the council, everybody in your town wants a Walgreens, or everybody in your town, wants another supermarket. And now, because enough people got these phone calls, everyone's talking about what's going to happen, where it's going to go, and you created all this concern or misinformation that was sort of, there's no need for it. You just, in my opinion, and Caroline's 100% right, if you're working together and all of our companies need to have people that understand. And frankly, when we do downtown work, we have particular construction supervisors that are downtown guys. We have guys that cannot be put in a downtown because they will fight with every single human being that's within a 200-foot radius. And then we have guys that are natural schmoozers, and they can, make the business next door who had to have the inconvenience because we had the road open for a day and a half feel good about the whole thing. So I think it goes not just from the approval process, it goes all the way down to get out there building the job.
I wanted to add something interesting, talking about hiring a consultant. Related, not related. We had gotten criticism in Asbury Park when we ran our master plan process and the various charrettes that we didn't have a consultant of color. And that was criticism that came from the community because the community felt that they wanted to be represented on our consultant side, that they felt if they were going to be giving this feedback, that they wanted to be giving that feedback to someone that they felt was maybe more sympathetic to some of their issues. Although that's something I typically disagree with, because one of the things I had stated is we do not hire based upon race. That's just something I wanted to share with everyone that may or may not come up in your community when doing any form of community outreach.
And I can back that. I just did, it's not TOD related, but I just worked on the Vision Zero Action Plan in Jersey City. And, we were going out to the community, and I'm a white woman, and I don't speak Spanish, and I don't speak Arabic, and I don't speak Tagalog, or what was the fourth language? Hindi. I don't speak any of those things. And so that is definitely a consideration, particularly, everywhere in New Jersey is getting more diverse. And our next question is who needs to be at the table, is recognizing that you have constituents besides the people who are just going to show up at the public meeting. There's a whole bunch of people who are going to have opinions who don't go to organized public meetings or outreach. And if you really want this to be a success and you want to be inclusive, sometimes that means going out to the community, setting up a table at, I'll give you an example, we did National Night Out, which got such a different group of people that we talked to. It was actually kind of felt really good. I'm like, I'm talking to people I've never met before in this city. I live in this city. I've done a lot of community engagement, and this is a whole new batch of people. So kind of thinking outside of the box at this point, I think, is really important for community engagement and going to the people, particularly now if you're talking about particular development, going to that neighborhood and making sure you know who lives in that neighborhood and who's going to be impacted by this development, and trying to reach out to them directly.
You know, the travel and outreach that you talked about is key. And one of the things that we do is we'll ask somebody who's in a neighborhood to open up their living room and have a small group of people come over and talk to them in a very informal, on a very informal basis. And that's very helpful.
And equal to that, I mean, the point about the racial makeup of the group is an excellent one and a sensitive one that I'll leave alone. But the idea of somebody being local, so is it New Brunswick Road or New Brunswick Avenue? And they can smell a mile away, and it always offends me, like, oh, well, you don't live in town. I'm like, okay, so you just want developers who live in town? You have 8,000 people here, and none of them really seem qualified to do this. But to try and bring somebody into the team and to educate yourself to understand. I was at a planning board meeting last night, and our expert called it road instead of avenue 15 times, and I almost strangled him. And everybody in the crowd knew this guy was from, you know, Trenton. And so I think that's an important piece of it, not just you know, the nationality or the religion or whatever, but somebody who can say, look, I live in a town very similar to this, or I live in the next town over, or we went through this in a similar town. So you're bringing some level of local experience to it.
Okay, let's shift a little bit away from community engagement. And this is more targeted to our three developers at the end of the table. Why work where you've worked? What made the towns you've worked in conducive to implementing TOD, or was it really conducive? Were there challenges to getting it going? Let's start with Deb.
So I think, you know, when people talk about TOD, I think that there's a certain perception of what that is. They assume that it's a parking garage with an apartment building on top of it, with maybe some retail on the ground floor, right, at a train station. And it's usually a pretty big building, and it's pretty dense, and they all look the same, and there's not a lot of creativity that goes with it. And I think that where municipalities are unique, and you know, it cuts both ways for the development community, is that communities really need to understand kind of what their vision is for their community as a whole, and how do they utilize their transit system to animate that community and maximize the value of that community. Our transit system is just not that great, right? So depending upon where your train station is or where your bus route is, once you're past a 30-minute ride, you're probably not moving there for the transit, right? You're probably moving there because it's a great community, it's near your job. You might take mass transit to work, but you're probably living there for a variety of other reasons. The transit infrastructure system is an amenity and a component of why you move there. We just completed a project in Red Bank that when I told Steve, who's built a project a few blocks away, that I was going into Red Bank, he's like, you're out of your mind. Red Bank is a town that has a great train station. They are near a ferry system, and they have an ordinance that requires 2 spaces per unit. And if you give anything less, you are the devil. There has to be a certain willingness of municipalities to engage with the development community, understand your local community issues and needs and requirements and wish list, but really engage with the development community in a way that there's a confidence and a partnership in understanding what they are capable of delivering to you. Because things can look great on paper, and we can write a lot of plans on paper, but if the planners writing that don't understand the financial viability of the ability to actually build that, all you're doing is educating and fostering a false perception of what can actually happen in your town, so that when the developer comes in and tries to present something, there's an innate expectation of what should be here. So we fought tooth and nail with Red Bank, where we were finally able to pursue a redevelopment process. After we were denied at the zoning board on a site that was originally approved for a denser project, I don't want to talk about it, but not salty at all. So
I asked him first.
But we, as my traffic engineer was reading off his actual counts, of buildings occupied at night at 2 a.m. that he went into, that was able to get in and see who's breaking there, and I'm giving them data of the 1.15 actual parking usage of all of the transit-oriented properties that I had done in Morristown and on the Hudson River, and the vice chair of the zoning board says, well, have you ever lived in Red Bank? My daughter has a car, and her friends have cars, and they all drive. And I said, but do you live downtown? So we were eventually able to move through the redevelopment process, got a parking ratio at 1.5 plus. Depending upon your community, you have to understand what your real transit needs are and what your real parking needs are. Because I can work with Carolyn, I can work with Michelle and come up with a great conceptual zoning guideline that gives me a tighter parking ratio so I can build a certain type of building and fit in a certain type of density. But if I can't market that building to a prospect, it doesn't help, right? So we're working in East Orange right now as an example. East Orange is very forward thinking and is really all hands on deck, really trying to put resources together to animate their train stations and really revitalize their city. East Orange their transit system's incredible. But once I get home, it's not necessarily the most walkable city. So what is the right parking ratio, right? And I can go to bat and say, well, I can fit 0.8 here. Jersey City, that's their parking maximum. Well, it's not as walkable as Jersey City. So the developer coming in going, I actually need to build more parking. How can you help me? Where are other municipal lots? What's your position on rideshare? What's your position on shared parking? How do we work through those types of conversations? Because I can't afford to build more parking, but I actually need it, right? So I think that conversation in relation to transit becomes incredibly important because depending upon what the transit system is it bus, is it rail, is it ferry, is it path, is it intermodal systems, the usage patterns are very different from community to community, and really understanding what that right balance is as important a part of the ability to have the dialogue and educate the constituents and get the buy-in from the business community. You really have to understand at the end of the day on the operational side what the realities are and what you really need to make it viable.
Deb made a great point, I think, about walkability. It's not just about the train. The reality is if you look around in Jersey, the towns with great train stops have great downtowns because they grew up that way, right? Towns like, Mercer County that are wonderful towns, East Windsor, West Windsor, they don't have trains, so they grew up along county roads with shopping centers and so on that aren't necessarily walkable. But because only a certain percentage of your residents are going to actually take the train to Manhattan 3 or 4 days a week. But what they get is this great walkable, dense downtown, which everything is in 4 or 5 blocks, from Ridgewood all the way down to Collingswood. You have that environment. And that's what people really, really are looking for, even as much or more than the train. Whether, we're in Cranford, Red Bank, Touching, even South Amboy, where we just opened the Transit Village, at least up like that. And one of the great parts of what our residents were telling us was, this is a cool little downtown. It's really vibey. The rents haven't gone crazy, so there's, different kinds of stuff can get in there. They don't need $40 a foot to make it work. So you're seeing that, and I think when you talk about selection and site selection, we're not just saying, okay, the train, because the train stop only gets you so much. It's what's grown there since 1910, in these types of communities.
Yeah, I mean, I work in a very different New Jersey, right? And so, one of the main attractions of Newark when I started to heavily invest there was the fact that there was this mass transit infrastructure there, and so we always intuitively knew that we have less of a parking requirement, but it was always with a forward-thinking city that, under Michelle, that sort of understood that we don't need as much parking. And so I never really contended with that. It really, from our standpoint, was always, okay, a marketability issue. So how much do we need? How much do we don't need? I mean, the other piece of that equation that we haven't talked about is, okay, and looking 10 years from now, what does that look like, right? Given ride share and so forth. And so we've always been looking, we've always been sort of trying to figure that component out and figuring out what the equation is there. And simultaneously also, yes, we had a downtown and we had a lot of activity in the downtown, but there was questions about whether, when we started, whether it was walkable, right? I mean, so our, even though we're 0.6, 0.7 miles from Penn Station or Broad Street Station, depending on the location, are you close enough to transit that sort of that makes a difference? And so we went at it in several different ways. And first of all, I had a much larger master plan, so I was able to, in the first phases, we also built the first ground-up residential building in 40 years. So, you talk about parking, we couldn't even figure out how to get the apartments. I started thinking about the parking. But so we took it, we used surface parking lot in the first instance to satisfy our requirements. We also added a shuttle to be able to take people to mass transit. And to the mass transit stations, and so really, and that's been sort of a hallmark of our projects. Our Teach the Village project, even in Chicago, for example, in Chicago we're about 0.8 to 0.9 miles from the nearest metro station, and so thinking about sort of connectivity to the mass transit grid has been something we've looked at. But what we found is that when you do have this connectivity to mass transit, when you do have, bike installations, bike rooms, bike racks, whatever it might be, and then also adding zip cars, in our population, and specifically Teachers Village, we found that our requirements are, more like 0.3 per unit. Really, folks aren't using the parking. And so when we think, I really do think when we think about TOD, I agree, it's not just right across the street from the station, but really sort of the connectivity to the grid, and thinking about understanding the marketability of your product and who's going to be using it and what other resources can you provide to reduce the parking requirements. And then again, part of the equation today is sort of, do you even need this parking in 10 years from now? And so, what other uses, alternative uses for this parking in the future? And so it really is on every project sort of, paramount to sort of the equation and figuring that out. But if we're close enough to TOD and we're in sort of urban areas that, that are emerging, it might not be walkable today, but emerging, certainly, how does the connectivity to the grid look today? How does the connectivity to the grid look in 10 years from now? What are your parking needs today, and what are your parking needs in 10 years? And so it's really sort of, threading the needle with those, metrics.
Can I address parking from the township point of view?
This morphed to parking, and that's fine.
Okay.
So let's go there.
And it should, because it really is one of the biggest issues that we have when we start with redevelopment. It's the first step that we almost have to take. And in Woodbridge, we're lucky enough to have, I think, one of the finest planners in the whole state. I know I'm a bit prejudiced. But even she, all we heard was the Rossi, and you have to have, 2 spaces per apartment. And obviously you developers were not buying into that. And we had a lot of going back and forth. And finally, we got her to like 1.5, a little lower, closer to the train. But we're challenged because transit, TOD, is new in Woodbridge. We're a very suburban town. We're all about cars. And I think there's a transition period where people are going to move in with their cars, and they have the cars now. And as they see that the services are here and they can walk to this and they can take the train to that, One car will ultimately disappear. Like you say, it's a long time story, so these are things we have to deal with. Once again, back to the Avenel Village. Now, Avenel Village, the train is literally right on the redevelopment property. They do not have to, they walk out their apartment and they're 3 steps away, honestly. We gave them the 1.5, they do not have enough parking. Yeah. So it's very hard, it's very hard.
Don't tell that story anymore.
But I think it's just, there's nothing around that village. There's no walkability. Well, that's the first step, and there will be as we develop the rest of Avenel. But right now, they do need their cars.
But that's the difference between suburban TOD and urban TOD. That is the fundamental difference, right? Suburban TOD, in my mind, is an opportunity to create a critical mass and a destination and a sense of place and figure out what needs to go in that place. But it can't just be apartments and parking, because if that's all it is in suburbia, you're going to have cars driving elsewhere because there's nothing around it, right? So urban TOD is a lot different. And so it's really understanding your specific community and your specific transit network, and who's living here today, and who are you trying to get to come here, and how are you going to get them to come here?
And going back to that example that I just gave, I think we have to be patient as we go through our growing pains, because I do believe at least half of those cars are going to disappear.
A lot of them are probably just sitting there all day.
All right.
Well, let's continue to blunt the point that Caroline made. In our Metuchen project, we built it on a 600-car, 650-car surface lot, right? So the town made a decision, we really want to have commuter parking for our residents. We don't really care to be a surface parking lot for the rest of central New Jersey. So we did some math on how many spots they needed and how many spots we needed, and we actually, our partner, Nexus Parking Systems, did a deal separate and apart from us with the Metuchen Parking Authority. But we, of course, needed a certain amount of parking to finance our job, right? No lender is going to give you $100 million to build an apartment building, and then you don't have enough parking. So we negotiated a deal with Nexus for a minimum number of parking units, understanding that they could reuse them for commuter lots, and they're very good at selling that space 2 and 3 and 4 times. And they're coming back to us thrilled because we're creating less parking than any of us thought. And so they're able to sell those spots for more. They're getting more on a daily basis from a commuter than they'd be getting from a monthly from one of our residents. So the parking is, we still have that minimum available to us because we have to by our contract and by our mortgage documents. But they're seeing so much less of a parking demand. I shouldn't say a number without having a lot of confidence, but I think it's like 1-1 that they're at right now, which is really, to your point, Carolyn, it's that one car, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're New Jersey, we're not giving up our car completely, but we don't need 2 cars because I can walk to Whole Foods, I can walk to dinner, I can get on the train and go, to work or into the city for entertainment or whatever.
Right. And our Morristown usage was also 1.15.
Right.
So those are very similar types of towns.
Very similar.
Are the banks coming around? Because I remember having a conversation with Bob Cotter probably a decade ago that when they were looking at the maximums, that the developers were saying, we can't get the financing because you're not allowing us to have as much parking as the banks think we need. And they did have one savvy developer who had enough buildings that he said, here's the utilization. And he came up with his own study to get around it, but not everybody has enough data. Are they coming around, or are they still trying to?
I think there's some sense of it, but to be very frank with you, we want to be conservative along with them, not just because of the bank, because if we don't have anywhere to park, we're really in trouble. And I talk to planning boards about this all the time, because not everything we do is structured parking, we do surface parking as well. And I say to them, listen, I appreciate your concern, but no one's more worried about this than we are. Because people come home from work and they don't have a place that's convenient for them to park, they're moving out. They're going to stay for their year, and they're going to be gone. So what we do is we actually make a colored chart of what we think the good spots are for the various entrances or buildings that are in the community, and we show the board, this is how we view it based on our internal experience. But Deb and I are going to be very conservative on that parking number, because the worst thing that could happen is you don't have enough parking. And like Caroline's making that point about 1.5, all of a sudden, you get that number and you can't meet it, you're nowhere.
I was going to say, I was going to shift a little bit about the parking. We, with a few of our developers, we actually have the opposite. They don't want to build
Well, they don't want to spend the money to build it.
Right, but I was going to say but what is more shifting a little bit essential, and you all in the private sector will agree, is mandating that the new buildings have a retail commercial component to create that. But as Deb's like saying, but I know, for the private sector, it's a big financial hit, because it's, from what I've heard from a lot of developers, they have to subsidize those spaces, at least in the beginning, and many times they don't want to build the retail component because it could be a money loser, especially if there's no other critical mass there. And I feel as though our group here is a lot savvier. One of our developers met with me yesterday about their development near the train station and asked, what do you think if we put the retail in a plaza, like inside, like set back? I'm like, no, why would you do that? And I had to explain the dynamic of how people use the street and meet the street, and how, the draw of the window when you shop, and again, what we're talking about, the dynamicism, if that's a word, about that. And I was a little surprised, because this was a savvy developer, and they actually said to me, we didn't think about it that way, thank you. But that's something, though, I feel needs to, if you're going to create the place, like you're talking about, needs to be in the regulations, because otherwise a lot of people who are doing TOD development are not going to want to put in the retail or the commercial or something. And when I say something, sometimes some of the negotiation is, while it's soft space, while critical mass is being built up, like a gym or to do office, which is easier to lease in this, post-Amazon world, that there be artwork or something of visual interest at the street level, so that you create that, you don't have dead spaces on the street. I also want to point out, one of the things, though, I'm seeing a little bit more the last few years is less cars, because of the phenomenon of Instacart, Amazon Prime, because one of the things you're seeing is people want their car to go to the supermarket. And now it's easier. If you don't have a supermarket within walking distance, or in Asbury Park, we have small supermarkets, but and we're not going to get a large supermarket, because right outside our city limits is Wegmans, ShopRite, Stop and Shop, and no one's going to come locate within the city of any of the major supermarket chains. But Instacart, Amazon Prime, ShopRite at Home is changing that.
So on and this is, we're jumping around and that's fine, talking about, I guess I see the retail in some cases, you can fill it, it's not a problem, but it's almost an amenity. And I know, there's one developer in Jersey City who's really good about this. He does subsidize the local, and he curates what goes in there. He will subsidize the dance studio because it's really good for his building, which is going to have children in it, to have a dance studio downstairs, or the pediatrician, or, so from the developer's perspective, is retail now becoming basically an amenity, and are you building in the fact that you might not get the highest market rate? I guess there's two perspectives. Some of them just leave it empty until someone's willing to pay the rent, and then others subsidize it, and kind of, where are you all on that?
We're all just nodding. It's a total amenity. 15 years ago, you had two income lines in your pro forma. Now you basically have one, and a little piece of one, cover the cam, a few bucks. You try not to overpromise to your lender as to the rents you're going to get. Great example, and then I'll pass the baton. Jim Constantine's here. When we did Metuchen, they came to us halfway through the process and said, there's too much retail in this project. We don't want this much, because our other downtown property owners are concerned that there's already some vacancy, downtowns are struggling. Why do we want to throw 35 or 40,000 square feet into the market? Let's cut it back to 14 or 15, which we saw the point, we saw the dynamic in the downtown, and we said that's fine, and we created more flexible space along the street, like brownstone-y kind of stuff that can be used as home studios or whatever, that created interest at the street level, but not necessarily vacant storefront at the street level. So I think towns are totally getting this now. Even 3 or 4 years ago, this was a much harder conversation. Yes, there needs to be retail because we want our residents to be able to walk downstairs and get coffee and be activated, but we don't want to over-retail like we did in our Morristown project, where in 2005, 2006, we built lower-level retail. Like, yeah, more retail, as much retail as we can get, and we can't lease the lower level of the retail. It looks cool, but, you know, I think that the Morristown wouldn't want it that way now, and we wouldn't want it that way now, and certainly our lender wouldn't want it that way.
But it does, some retail, like you were saying, the coffee shop or whatever, does benefit you
Yes.
from the rents that you're gonna get above.
Yeah.
It's the concept of doing no retail is dead, hopefully, yes?
I think it depends on the scale of the building
Yeah,
and
well,
and the
yeah.
location.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but having a one-off building that's got 2,000 square feet of retail, that, there's no critical mass. That tenant is going to die. There's nothing worse than putting a retail tenant in your building and having them go out of business, because it taints the space for the retail community. And the tenants in the retail space think that there's something wrong with that. They
It
think
doesn't
there's
help
not
your
a- right?
residential
It
either.
doesn't help above, right? You've got dark lights on the ground floor, but importantly, in terms of, right, developers talk, lawyers talk, planners talk, retail tenants talk, right? So when a business doesn't survive, releasing that space becomes incredibly difficult. So it's easy to subsidize retail if you're doing a mixed income project where you have financing subsidies. It's easy to subsidize retail if you're given enough density above to allow that cash flow to offset it. It's easy to subsidize retail if you don't have to build parking for retail because park on the street or it's the people upstairs, right? So it all goes into, you know, what is your planning position and trying to fit those pieces in the puzzle.
Who your neighbors.
And who your neighbors are and you know, what are you trying to attract here? There's also plenty of towns and plenty of planners when a developer comes in and tries to be savvy and throw co-working space and incubator space and art, you know, art studios, they're like, enough. You're all talking about this stuff, like, enough, like, I want a bookstore, right? I want this type of tenant, right? And
They used to want
and-
Talbots.
Right, but the conversation has morphed into understanding, you know, medical uses as retail, right? The world of marijuana legalization and whatever's gonna happen there or not happen there has transformed the retail discussion. Towns are setting up ordinances to accept or prohibit, and it's not just about that end user associated with marijuana. All those other, it's going to have a domino effect of what retailers are gonna come into those towns or not, right? So it's, what's the scale of the retail, no different than what's the ratio of the parking, and really understanding, it does serve as a amenity, particularly in suburbia, in suburban TODs, that retail is an amenity because it is there to create that destination. So you've got to be able to subsidize it in some way through the holistic approach to the project.
And vibe. To feel better about this, though, I'll tell you a quick story. My older son lives in Manhattan, and he wants to move to the West Village because it's good for commuting for his roommates and all. So he finds a fifth-floor walk-up on 3rd Street, really nice part, right in the middle of the village. And he sends me pictures. And the first floor retail, best back rub in the village. And I'm like, oh, this is, you know, what happened to the cool record stores from when I was a kid? So this is a problem that's not just, you know, unique to Woodbridge or Red Bank or wherever.
Does anyone want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, so, and I agree. I mean, I think that it's project-specific. It's also, you know, sort of neighborhood-specific, where you're building, and the vision for that neighborhood on a going-forward basis is going to dictate some of that. So, yeah, you know, there are streets that are naturally just residential. I mean, we can look at New York City, too. I mean, you go over to East End Avenue, and it's a residential street with maybe a little bit of activity and a couple of storefronts along the whole avenue. And you go to other avenue, and it's all retail. And so you really have to think about your neighborhood and where, you know, when you think about walkability, you know, you got to understand how the flow of people, the flow of cars, the flow of, you know, modes of transportation, and really understand where the natural locations are going to be. You know, we are building in urban cores. We're generally in emerging markets in urban cores, and so we have, we have generally projects of scale, and so to not build and subsidize retail is not is a non-starter, because when you think about the long-term viability of that neighborhood, you can't have retail. You can't not have the retail, and so, you know, how you do that is part of the art also. There is, yes, you got to think about different uses. You got to think about the lifestyle of the project. Day one, you got to think about the lifestyle of the project in the future, and also sort of, okay, day one, what does this neighborhood look like? And in a few years, what does this neighborhood look like? And it really is, you know, another part of the puzzle. But, you know, when you think about, you know, especially if you're one of the first in an emerging market, first or second in an emerging market, you want the long term, you want that transportation, that sort of, you know, nucleus of energy, that sort of, you want to be the nucleus of that flow within a city, and so you really need to figure out how you have enough retail to make sure that you are sustainable into that future, and you continue to be the sort of, you know, center of that energy, and so, and that activity, and so you absolutely have to start subsidizing retail. And some of the things that, you know, Michelle and I were talking about before, but some of the things you start to see in these emerging markets, when you know, a lot of buzz around the emerging markets and urban cores and distressed census tracts are, you know, this talk about opportunity zones, and I feel that, you know, New Jersey in particular has been very focused on small businesses and sort of deploying capital in that way. But I think what you're going to start to see is a lot of capital going into these smaller businesses and these smaller entrepreneurs and these retail businesses, because they, you know, there's a unique opportunity for these small entrepreneurs to get into business, and there's a unique opportunity on the development side where you have to build the retail, and there's not a whole lot, you know, there's not a whole lot of retail activity today, and so, you know, there's some. I think the conversation of opportunity zones, particularly here in New Jersey, is going to how do we sort of ensure new businesses, new small businesses are activating these types of spaces. But so again, another part of the equation, and sort of right-sizing it, and you know, part of the difficulties of being a developer.
Yeah,
So let's start
just
with
another
Carolyn
one.
and Michelle. I got a follow-up related to this. So at what point and who kind of really starts thinking about what should this retail mix be? How does it relate to your downtown? We're downtown New Jersey. We got to think about our business improvement districts and our businesses that already exist. You know, is it the developer? Is it the bid doing a market study? Is the town doing a market study? Is it all of us?
All of the above, I would definitely say, and the community. You know, you can't always get, from a marketing study, you can't always get the feel of the community. Although the problem is going out to the community, they'll all say they want something that we can't possibly get. But
Everyone wants a
it's,
microbrewery.
you know, and we have the microbrewery. As
They
a
can't serve
township,
food.
we
No.
would love to make Woodbridge downtown more artsy and have it be an arts district, but that needs a lot of subsidies. It doesn't just happen, and so we have to decide, are we going to invest in that retail piece to get exactly what it is that we want? My ideal, because we're in Woodbridge, we're at the very beginning of building the TOD. We have our first one, should be this fall, the first cranes should start rolling into town. Surprisingly, a week after the election. I don't know if that's just a coincidence or what. The cranes will start rolling in. So my dream for one of the bigger spaces is to get a children's museum. And I will do whatever I can to work with the developer and whomever else I have to look out and do the research, because that would just be a great destination for Woodbridge. And so
So I'm not the expert in this yet, and when I come back to talk in a year or two, maybe I will be. You are though.
I was going to say, I find it hard for government to curate a retail mix. You know, regulation, you can talk more about retail versus commercial, general commercial versus office versus medical. But I find hard for people in City Hall to be the curators of what it should be. I find SIDS do it better with the support of the municipality. Occasionally, a redevelopment agency can dictate a redevelopers agreement if they want a specific type of retail, whether it's the bookstore, but I find that very difficult to put on a developer these days because I find a lot of things such as the bookstore or the coffee shop is actually coming from, like Ron said, small town entrepreneurs, that they're the ones who are more likely to open up those kind of niche businesses, per se. So I find more so, like I said, it's easier to say don't do office on the ground floor, although like I said, depending on this section of town it is, and if there's continuous retail or not, we may permit it on more of an interim basis while that space, while the rest of the area develops around it. Related, not related, because this isn't about a specific TOD development per se, but one of the things we did with rezoning our downtown, it's the CBD redevelopment area, the zoning that was put in place originally in 2002 worked in 2002, where along Cookman Avenue prohibited non-retail. It prohibited service. When I say service, meaning a hairdresser or another nail salon. And part of it was because at the time.
Let me know when the first one closes.
No, that's the thing. Now we actually only have one. So now we successfully pushed it out. So what we did though is we permitted the service back on Cookman, but the front of your storefront again has to be activated. You have to have product in your front, and that goes well with the hairdressers. They have displays of products you can buy. It actually also works a little bit with the nail salon. We have them activate the front with the nail polishes and the seating area in the front. So again, like it's service, but the front is activated, and we had to change it because actually our current retailers were looking for a little bit of a mix because, and also the people leasing the space, because again, there was less demand for the traditional retail. So we had to think a little bit about outside the box. Plus, people are going, again, we're going Amazon world, is you clearly can't order services. And there seems to be an increase of the types of services you can have. And even though this is, again, unrelated, I want to bring up, I just had to deal with, for first, a service that's very new on the scene for me, IV spas. Yes, so.
It's totally new.
Yes, so this is like.
Don't you watch Billions?
And I had to do a lot of, you can, it's a spa where you go and get an IV of fluid, and it's particularly, can be anti-aging, but particularly well known if you are hungover, you could go. And I had to do a lot of research about this because I made my first application for this in the retail area. And that's an example of like the changing markets and the emerging markets. That's clearly service. And how they've come to, it's in Hoboken.
It's a high-end use, so they're looking at Asbury, I think that's good for you.
No, but
Not everybody can afford a hangover IV.
Yes,
I just drink coffee and seltzer, see what happens?
Yeah, like that. But I was going to say that's an example of where we're constantly in government, I feel like catching up with the, with the market and the private sector. and that the world of service, we're going to see a lot, the world of service is emerging a lot more than the world of retail.
That's actually interesting. So our September roundtable, and you can read the summary of it on Downtown New Jersey's website, that was the topic of discussion, because South Orange recently, the bid worked with the municipality and their planner to rework the zoning, because they found that there were businesses that wanted to come in that were prohibited by their zoning, because the world of retail is changing so rapidly, and we're still have, 1960s, 50s zoning that says that tattoo parlors are a scourge on the community. Now, 70% of the adult population has a tattoo.
Particularly all those millennials that we want renting our apartments.
So from a planning and being prepared perspective, you just have to be really on your toes and be changing rapidly to IV spas, please. All right.
Caroline, we kind of came full circle back to choosing your redeveloper, right?
Yeah.
Because Michelle, I couldn't agree more. Everything she said I thought was spot on. You can try and encourage it and push it along with zoning, but it's hard for government to curate retail. But for instance, we have a mixed-use community down in South Jersey, and the broker brought us an infusion center, not a cool, hip HIV. Nothing cool or hip about that. Not an IV hangover place, but an infusion center. And I'm like, well, that is terrible. I don't care what the rent is. Don't send out the LOI. We're not doing that. And the broker was kind of upset. He's like, this is a good rent. It's more than you were asking for. I said, I don't care. An infusion center does nothing to make our mixed-use community more exciting and more fun. Not that we're heroes. Because like the point Ron was making, that this is a long-term decision that creates your vibe, and you better be on top of it, because if you have all lousy retail, it's eventually going to affect the rest of your mixed-use community, whether it's office or retail. So these are conversations that the town should be having with the redevelopers they're selecting in their TOD area.
I think that's I think that's the point, just to nail the point that they're saying, which is, I think the best curation of retail, both on the developer side and on the public side, is just to understand what you don't want, right? Just be very clear on what is not going to be here. The rest, you have to respond to the market, you have to respond to the opportunities, and that's really the best curation, because you want flexibility. We are predisposed to, sort of curating what we know and what works somewhere else, and that sort of, doesn't naturally create an authentic experience, which is what we're all sort of looking for. So the authentic experience has really got to be sort of this open canvas that has sort of, that has some sort of boundary set by not only the developer but the public. So, I think it's very difficult to say exactly what you want there. But I think it's much easier to say what you don't want and what doesn't work. And yes, over time that's going to change. But I think, with the living downtown plan that we did in Newark, it was really like, okay, we don't want a 5,000 square foot ATM bank on the middle of Market Street because it's just a dead use, and so I think that's sort of the best, place for government and sort of the private sector to be sort of curating and sort of understanding what you don't want.
So I'm going to shift this a little bit. We were talking about retail as amenity. Can we talk about other amenities? What is the design? It's certainly different than what we all grew up with. I didn't have a gym or, whatever. So, an IV bar. What are you finding are the amenity mix that you have to have at this point, and what are some of the kind of maybe have to make your product sell? Or do you need to have it?
Deb knows a lot about amenities.
I think it depends on the location and the scale of your asset. So, I'm going to point to Morristown for a second, because Steve did the same thing in Morristown when our broker brought us a lease for $65 a foot for CVS. He said absolutely not, and I thought my broker was going to have a heart attack, because we said this does nothing, right? If CVS had gone there, there would be no Roots Steakhouse, there'd be no Urban Table, there'd be no Starbucks, there'd be, what's the men's shaving salon?
1880.
Right? None of that would have been there, right? But we were very focused on the amenities, right? So what is that amenity program? It depends on the scale of your asset and who's living there. So I do a lot of advisory work as well as my own projects, and I wind up engaging with a lot of clientele who's now decided that they can make a lot of money in the multifamily space, and they have a 62-unit apartment building with a swimming pool and on the roof, and on a 7-story building. And I come in and I say, yeah, we're not doing that. And the owner goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, you need 250 people to support a swimming pool. You need rents in a market of a certain price point if you'd like to have a structured swimming pool in your garage or on the roof of your building as opposed to in-ground. So there's just certain financial metrics that can make or break a certain amenity from an operational perspective. But it's really also understanding who's living in your building. So I'm a big believer, right? The large-scale, Class A, highly amenitized, dense multifamily projects, those merit 3, 5, 10,000 square feet of amenities, depending upon what the building program is and the unit mix is, because you're targeting that young millennial who just got out of college, living in a building that Chris Palladino built with amenities that blow your mind away. So that's what you expect, right? And you are of a demographic where you want to be social, right? You've got a job, but you want to come hang out with your friends. You want to hang out in the lounge. You want to hang out in the game room. Right? You're gonna go to the gym. You're gonna do your spin classes. But you're there to be part of that social community, as opposed to the Element that we just opened yesterday in Red Bank is a 35-unit community that is targeted for the baby boomer and the empty nester. Its amenity is a community terrace that's got different types of social seating, some more passive, some more active, but the amenities are your town. You're across the street from the park. You are on the river. You are 3 buildings away from Urban Outfitters and everything on Broad Street and every restaurant. You are a 5-minute walk to the train. You're a 3-block walk to the Count Basie Theater. There is no amenity I can put in that building that the town can't offer you better. So let me do quality living spaces to get people living in quality homes so that they come home, maybe they drive and park their car, maybe they've taken the train, but then they go downtown and they amenitize in town. The initial, on a certain scale, multifamily asset, that initial amenity is your gym. That's a given, right? We're very lazy. If we have to go outside and go to the gym, we don't go, right?
If you have to exercise to get to the gym, then.
Yeah, right?
Plus another $100 a month.
Yeah.
But to me, the best amenity is an open space courtyard that you can program for different passive and active uses, right? Barbecues, if your fire official will let you have it. A water feature, if it's an internal courtyard, you want to diffuse some noise, but creating a certain environment outside the home. And when we're trying to urbanize suburbia, you have parks, but how close are the parks, right? And if you're building in downtown, if you're building on a train station, there's probably that much open space around you. So if you can design your building in a way where there's some courtyard space, that's really important. And I see that increasing more in zoning requirements where there are minimum requirements of X amount of square feet based on X% of gross buildable footage. That I think is a good ordinance. But you've got as plenty of amenities.
We're big into the amenity chase, but I think Deb's right. Where you are matters. So we have a community out in Mount Arlington, and it's sort of isolated off of Route 80. There's not really a there. So we built a there's 10,000 square foot amenity space, 2-story pools, decks, party rooms, golf simulators, outdoor gardens. It's like a resort, and it's worked. Whereas if you're in a downtown area, particularly if you're in a smaller building like Deb's speaking of, your location's your amenity. But what you're seeing just generally is rooftop. Get them upstairs, let them party and have some kind of view. 2-story amenity spaces are all the rage. The newest one, I think, in is it Bayonne out on the Hook, has a rock climbing wall that's 3 stories. We're doing a lot of 2-story amenity space. The gyms are getting much more sophisticated because everybody wants to save that $120, not have to go join the fancy gym. We also have what's known as fitness on demand, which is basically like a computer, and you can pull up anything you want. You want to take kickboxing, it comes up. You want to take spin, you want to take yoga, you just push in your thing, and what happens is people start to come together to do that. Oh, you do yoga, let's meet here Tuesdays at 6:30, and we'll do yoga together. Now there's 2, there's 3, there's 4 people doing yoga in the activity room, and people are making friends. If people make friends in your community, they're exponentially more likely to renew, good for us, right? Two-story amenity spaces, we have a lot of luck with the golf simulator, because the millennials don't really want to play golf, but they want to drink beer and hit golf balls. So we found that really works, and we're doing a lot of that. You know, the business center is sort of a tired use. If you need a business center, you better have great Wi-Fi in your units. We'll all attest to that. If you don't have good Wi-Fi in your building, you are done. And not just for the millennial, people are working from home. Everybody expects to click on their icon and be online and have it happen fast. So that, I think, is, while not necessarily considered an amenity anymore, because it's mandatory, is a huge amenity.
Do you think the advent of the co-working space has kind of eliminated the need for the business set? Is that
No, I
the
think
impact, or
it's the
just-
laptop. If,
Yeah.
you know, you just don't need, nobody needs a computer. What they use in ours are this printer. So we have printers, and they're small little spaces with printers, and it gets abused by some people. But that's the other amenity that we just started to do, which is great. I thought I didn't come up with it. We have one commercial washer and dryer in the building. So if you want to do your duvet cover, or if you were skiing that weekend, and, you know, the washer dryers in our homes, which is a must in all new apartments, in-unit washer dryers, but they're not huge. So you could go use for free the commercial washer dryer that's down in a special area, and you can do your duvet cover. It doesn't kill our washing machine, right? So now you're not overloading a washing machine in the unit that we'd have to replace, and you're providing a service. And everything else, and I'll shut up, is pet center. Pet friendly. We have dog grooming, on-site, off-site, dog walking, on-site, off-site, and we actually test your DNA, your dog's DNA poop when you move in, and if the poop is unscooped, we send it back to the lab, and you're in big trouble.
Is that true?
Really?
It's a big service. We've gone all in on it. It's a big service now, and it's not expensive. So nobody could say that wasn't my dog.
It's a third-party service?
It's a third-party service.
I don't think he's doing himself.
Well, yeah, but, you know, if we get enough scale, we could open a little lab, but, right. And the person whose dog it was pays for the test and a fine on top of it.
great idea.
And after 3 strikes, you're on the eviction list.
Is that in the lease agreement?
Oh, sure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You have the DNA test. And, well, you know, we always have a pet deposit, and there's a pet rent. Pet deposit's usually returnable, pet rent isn't, because you're gonna have more wear and tear on the apartment home. But people love their dogs, they'll pay whatever to move their dog in. We have a very limited list of prohibited breeds. You know, no Dobermans, no pit bulls. Some people get upset by that, but actuarially, with our insurance company, it's just a lot easier. And then, you know, we have a great sink where you can bring your dog with lowers them in, puts them in, and you can wash them yourself for free. So it makes owning a pet a lot easier. You're not in the backyard with the garden hose fighting with them, you know, so.
Well, so that reminds me of another topic of clearly pet owners, dog owners are living in these TODs. And in my head, I'm thinking amenities for children, which gets to the question, who's living there? Are people with children?
No kids,
there?
no, 0 kids.
And I'm going to preface
I don't know how you
this by
can
saying
see
I moved into a high-rise in Jersey City in 2009 that had absolutely 0 space for kids because the developer told the city and the city agreed, there will be no kids in this building. It's going to be all professionals who go. And meanwhile, the people who wanted to do yoga got very angry because all of us with kids took over the yoga room as the playroom. So what are you seeing in TOD? Are they having kids and staying for a couple of years? Are they staying with kids? And just who's living in these places?
We're seeing some children, not a lot, very few school-age children. And our hope is, and as our mayor says, children are not toxic. They're not poison. We want them, we welcome them. And our hope is, because most of these apartments, even the luxury apartments, are rather small. There's a limit to how big the people can be that live there and how many people can live there. So our hope is once the children and the family outgrows the house, the apartment, that they will move into our residential community and love the town so much that they stay there. And I think what we're hearing with the millennials is as they're aging, a good many of them do want to invest in a home. So it's a
what we used to call a starter home is now a starter apartment.
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and a plug for Rutgers for a second. The Rutgers Center for Real Estate released a white paper last summer where we did a survey of apartment buildings throughout New Jersey. We surveyed about 40,000 units. And it was a survey of the development community, the property management community, to understand the correlation of the number of school-age children in multifamily buildings. And what the study identifies very transparently, quite frankly, is it's not necessarily, we tried to assess and analyze the correlation of proximity to transit. The real distinguishing factors that go into the number of school-age children in a building is the product type, is it low-rise, mid-rise, or high-rise? The average household income, and the mix, right?
And how old it was.
And how old it was. So there's a clear delineation on product that was built pre-2000 versus post-2000. An even more of a delineation on product really built, in the boom of kind of 2010 and on. But what the real metric is the price points of the household income. Market rate units on average, the survey finds, I want to say, I'm going to misquote it because it's like an obnoxiously low number that none of you planners are going to believe, but I want to say it's like 0.32 children for every 100 units, as opposed to affordable housing units that generate 68 children for every 100 units. So understanding the product type that you're delivering and the density and the market that you are catering to is really the conversation you should be having. And then again, it's overlaying the conversation of, okay, well, 10 children means 1 kid per grade. There's no impact there to our system, right? So it's also then taking that conversation about what is the number and how does that break down and really affect your school district. Does that mean we're now going to lead into the school district pilot discussion?
Yeah.
I'm ready for that.
We can that is fine.
I don't know if we have enough time for that.
I don't go as long as the mayor does something.
But for the planners in the room, if you have not seen the study, it is available on the Rutgers Center for Real Estate website. It's downloadable, it's emailable, it's very short and simple to read, which was part of how we did it. And it shows the correlation and analysis by county. And these are not census data projections, these are actual surveys taken from living, operating buildings.
Deb had a big hand in it, and I would say it's one of the top 10 planning tools. I mean, along with like the redevelopment statute and the long-term tax exemption statute, this document is a must for everybody to have. It's amazing.
Last year you did?
It came out in July, yeah.
And she was tortured because it was so exacting. We gave all of our data, and the way they wanted it presented was so that they could give it to you and what the age groups were, the heights, I mean, the years of the buildings, the number of bedrooms, and so on. So it was very, very, it was a very drilled down exercise from the data collection that Deb helped to spearhead. It's really an amazing document.
So do we want to discuss, because we have this hit on 2 topics that we want to discuss. One is affordable housing, and then one is pilots. I think it might be more logical flow to talk affordable housing and then talk about how you fund all of this. And I think part of what struck me, and just because I did that, I lived in an apartment when my daughter, I think she went to pre-K because it's free in Jersey City, while we were still in the apartment, but then we bought a brownstone. Right, and I think a lot of people do that, but I'm not a millennial, I'm Gen X, so I had a job out of college.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening with millennials? Are they going to be able to make that jump? And that relates to housing affordability and not just, I think we have the multiple levels of affordability. We have affordable housing and we have middle income, what's affordable, and,
Right.
and how are we
don't forget
addressing
that student loan issue.
And the student loan
For
issue,
millennials.
and yeah.
So on the affordable housing, when we did our settlement, Fair Share Housing really did us a favor
because they agreed to a percentage of what we should have in each of our residential redevelopment projects. So when the developers came to us and we said, this is the number, there's no discussion, this is what it has to be, it ended the discussion. And everybody agreed to it. Nobody walked away and said, we can't do that. When before we had the settlement and it was wishy-washy, and oh no, we can't do that, we'll never get funding, it was much harder. So if you're still negotiating, the best thing that you can do is know what it is you have to do, so you're not negotiating with the court and you're not negotiating with the developer. The other piece is, how do you deal with affordable housing and the public? Because they have this concept of who is going to be moving into town with this affordable housing. I call it next generation housing, because the people who are living there are our children. For me, my grandchildren. It's the millennials who are not, can't afford a home. They're just out of college, they don't have that much money, they're making that job, and I tell people, if you want your kids to be able to stay in our town, there's a waiting list over there for the affordable housing. Get them on it. And everybody to a person who has moved in with affordable housing has been a positive person and family in our community. It's been a very, very good experience. So we just got to re-educate.
We have a little bit different thing going on with affordable housing. We do not have a requirement. We just voluntarily did a fair share plan. We're voluntarily doing an affordable housing ordinance. The community has clamored for this, and when I say community, across all income levels, because everyone knows, Asbury Park has been a hot market, but also a hot market in that we're seeing an increase in summer homes rather than year-round residents. So even the middle income, upper middle income residents want affordable housing because they want the community to stay a 12-month-a-year community. So while for us in the government and the residents, we don't think it's a dirty word, we are having issues with some with the developers wanting to put in affordable housing. And especially, we are mandating that they go by the code requirements, so that means 3-bedroom units in buildings where the developer had no intention of building 3-bedroom units, and 3-bedroom units usually means a family. So that's just been a little bit of our challenge, but we're unique. But we're unique. Jersey City's in the same boat, Newark is in the same boat, where we want the affordable housing because our residents see the reality, they're experiencing the reality of just a few years ago, could afford to rent or buy, and then boom, 3 years later, they see that opportunity gone. So we actually are seeing some children in rental buildings because the parents can't afford to buy a house in Asbury Park, and then we see them move out of town to neighboring communities where the housing's a little cheaper and the school system is considered better.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, when you think about long-term neighborhoods, you need a diversity of housing stock. So I think it's essential that you're including affordable housing, and when we say affordable, there can be a range of affordability, so it could be sort of affordable and workforce housing. But when you think about the long-term vibrancy of your neighborhood or your city, and it's exactly it. I mean, there's a perception around it, but the bottom line is there's a lot of folks in our community that can benefit from the lower cost units, and you want those constituents to remain in your neighborhood. And you know, you just have to look to New York City and and understand that the rent stabilized and rent controlled units, the million units that we have there, the vibrancy it created, the opportunities it created for people to come and live in the city, plant roots, and then grow in that city. And so, I think that it starts when you see, particularly urban areas that have not sort of done a good job with affordable housing. The neighborhoods are quite sterile. You really, when you think about the vibrancy of a city, it really is diversity of people and diversity of income, and so you naturally need a diversity of housing stock to accommodate that. So I think when you think about TOD development, when you're thinking about urban areas, but particularly, TOD development, I don't, it's even curious to me that we're still, talking about it. We have to, we have to build a lot more of it, and it should be, sort of second nature at this point.
And it can lead to, and I could see it happening in Asbury Park, it certainly happened in Jersey City, it leads to an us and them. If you have a gentrified area, and then you have another area that's not gentrified, now you have two different factions within your community who, and particularly the old school people don't like all those new people downtown, and so it causes problems when you don't maintain that mix. I had an interesting conversation with the mayor of Somerville years ago, because they weren't doing affordable housing in the early stages of the redevelopment. And my suggestion was, maybe you're not doing the 10-15% set aside in the new development, but if you don't do it now, he said, well, we have a lot of affordable housing. I'm like, but that new development is going to drive that old development to turn over. And the person who owns this building realizes, oh, I have an asset here, and I put, some marble countertops in, and now this isn't an affordable housing unit anymore. And so you've missed out on building that affordable housing that you're ultimately going to lose in the first stage. So, I've made suggestions of, maybe start at 5%, and then after you have a couple of developments, go up to 10, but yeah, otherwise you have the gentrifying.
Yeah, and it's, when you look at your town or your city on a holistic, you don't want these pockets, you don't want to create pockets of poverty, you don't want to create, and you don't want to create a tale of two cities. And quite frankly, when you build in the diversity of housing stock within the buildings and within the community, I walk through my buildings, I have no idea who's who.
Yeah.
You have no idea who's in the affordable units, who's in the market rate units, and so when you integrate it in that way, you really build healthier communities, and sort of on a macro perspective, when you look at your entire neighborhood, you really have a lot more opportunity for growth when you do it that way, and so you don't create the cycles of poverty, and you don't, and the pockets of poverty, and so. It is a perception we need to break. You have no idea who's who in these developments, and it's really critical to the vibrancy of the neighborhood.
So I just wanted to build on Caroline's point, because I think when she made the point that the settlements did towns a favor, the point she made is spot on. There's a second favor they did them too, though, in that it allowed progressive forces to push projects forward, particularly TOD projects that might have been meeting resistance, by saying, hey guys, the court made us do affordable housing, and this property owner jumped into the case, so we're going to let him do his 120 units near the train, but it's going to give us the affordable to help us meet our requirement. Now you've got this sort of cover to say, the judge made me do it. And we're seeing that around the state in a lot of different capacities, whether there were just more progressive forces or people that understood diversity of housing stock, which I think is great that Ron's used that term 3 or 4 times, because that's the watchword post-recession in my mind. In all towns, we have a job in Roxbury, and I used to tease them all the time. Guys, diversity of housing stock is not 4-bedroom colonials and 5-bedroom colonials. So, and they got it. They came back to us at some point and said, we want you to build multifamily because we're seeing it happen everywhere, and we don't want to be missing that boat. So I think that it does give you that ability. I was at a planning board meeting last night where, the mayor actually said, we need these affordable homes, and this is a great way to get it. So I think that's another big favor that the settlements have done for towns.
The one thing I just want to comment on that, and I do believe in everything that was said on this panel and support it 1,000%. The challenge is when you're doing, right, the premise of the inclusionary affordable is that you've been upzoned and given more density to absorb the operations of that reduced revenue, right? So when you're looking at a more boutique scale redevelopment that has the same blanket black and white obligation, that math is a lot more challenging, and those problems, right? On a 30-unit project, a developer is going to have a problem, right? On a 300-unit project, it's a lot easier for you to go, yeah, they're not walking away. Okay, but on a 30-unit project, I'm walking away. Okay, so the one thing that I encourage is that we look at even, trying to identify a floor size, a scale of density of projects where that inclusionary component becomes a trigger.
Which is a good transition for our last 7 minutes before we open this up into how, you want amenities, you want parking, you want affordable housing.
You want to clean the environment?
And there's always give backs. I want a microbrewery, or I want a school or a preschool. How do we fund this? It's not going to pencil out if you want all of those things,
Okay,
right?
well, I'll start with the most effective tool that the township has to give to redevelopers and developers, and that is the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes. It is probably one of the most misunderstood tools, even by our own legislators. They don't understand it. And now with what's going on in Trenton with the business incentive program, it becomes even more confusing, and comparing the EDA grants to a pilot that a town gives is like saying the two of us are exactly the same person. We're very different. And so the way the pilot works is they pay lower taxes than their assessed tax over a period. How you do the pilot with the developer is a negotiation between the town and the developer. Sometimes it's a percentage of net profit. With the warehouses, we like to do just a flat percentage of what the taxes would be, starting at like 85% for 10 years, 90 for 10 years, and then 95 for another 10. But that's not the important part. The important part is everybody saying the town gets the money and the schools get nothing. That is not the issue at all. Schools are not being hurt. Schools get their 100% of their levy. The town collects it from the taxpayer and gives them back all of their levy. What happens when we get a new warehouse in town? Our tax rate goes down. Now that tax rate, it's the same wallet. Your school taxes and your municipal taxes are coming out of the same checkbook. The same person is writing it. So the school tax goes down, or the municipal tax goes down. When it comes in as a pilot into the municipality rather than school, there are more things that you can do with that money. And if the Board of Education and the township work together, you can actually use these pilots to start to transform your town. John does not have anything in writing, so you can't ask him for a copy of his formula or an Oprah. It's all in that big brain of his. But what he does is...
John is the mayor.
So John McCormick is the mayor. He does 25% of all of our pilot money he puts toward the schools or community projects. So if we redo a football field, that's considered a community project because everybody, even though it's at the high school, everybody can use it. So at this point, he has $35 million we have bonded. And he gives that out over the years. He pays it off. And from the pilot, he pays that off. But we have that money to spend in the community. The whole entire look of the town has changed as we improve the outdoor fields in our school, the auditoriums in our school. Our home values have literally gone up, which is more important than what the taxes are if your value is going up.
And so it's all a good news story. We built a new school, elementary school, where we're doing the TOD, and we're doing a new addition to a middle school. We got a referendum passed, and one of the reasons we got the referendum passed was because we told the residents, we're not going to use new tax dollars to pay off this debt bond. And the pilot money is paying for these new schools and that referendum. So it's all a good news story. And if you're in a town where people are arguing with you, if your schools are arguing, Woodbridge would be very happy to come forward and tell the story about how successful this tool is.
You are doing it right, but there are a lot of
right
communities
now.
that aren't doing
You
it.
have to work together. You have to work
I
together.
completely agree with you that pilot has been a dirty word. It doesn't need to be a dirty word. And we're the same, certain percentage of our pilot goes back to the schools. But the perception is out there that it's because of the word tax abatement, that where it's not, a true tax abatement. So it's more of a perception challenge, but it's a true challenge. And again, it's tough to educate the public on this because it's some deep finance. And even if we talk about it in terms of, we're getting this much compared to this value and this percentage, a lot of people can't grasp that. But if you're going to do affordable housing, and the developers will test that, there's not that many carrots in the state. I use the term sticks and carrots, incentives. And the biggest incentive that we have right now is it's a pilot to fund affordable housing.
I think the key is actually accounting for it, and knowing what's happening with that money, that you're actually collecting what you're supposed to collect, because I don't know how many black eyes some towns have gotten that they realize, they actually made more money off of that, we should have been getting a bigger pilot out of them, or
Right.
because nobody is following it and saying every year, this is the result of it. So I think that's also a lesson for communities that are going to do it. Don't just give it and say, it's done. And really quick, before we jump to questions, I do want to get to, I think this is where our developers will have an opinion. Some of the other legislative initiatives related to pilots that are going out, particularly trying to link prevailing wage to the pilots, and thoughts on that.
Well, Caroline just said, we'll come to your town and explain pilots. I want to take her down to Trenton and have them explain pilots.
John testified.
I know, and there's no better spokesman, frankly, for the whole program, and the league is on his side. But there are dark forces out there that want to either tie minimum school contributions and/or prevailing wage to pilots that will, in essence, kill the use of pilots, either because of politics or just because of the sheer weight of the financial obligation that will come with them. Just like there's a lot of EDA programs and brownfields programs that don't get utilized because of the strings that are attached to them. We all get that's politically sensitive, and we certainly, a living wage in New Jersey is important. But when there's too many restrictions tied to the pilot, everyone's going to throw their hands up and say it doesn't work anymore. And so, in our opinion, and I'm going to speak for all three of us, these statutes that are being introduced are they're a one-size-fits-all that don't allow for any of the flexibility that Mayor McCormick has introduced at Woodbridge and have been introduced. We have 9 or 10 pilots at my company. I have 9 or 10 mayors that are doing different things with them, and they're all somehow dealing with the Board of Education. So the flexibility, in our mind, is really working, and by Trenton coming in and screwing it up, frankly, it's going to kill. There are 2 programs in New Jersey that are amazing, that other states emulate. The LSRP program to clean up contaminated sites, and the pilot program. And we're trying to screw up one of them.
I think we've hit most everything. We should probably, I'm handing it over to Stephanie here.
Should I come over there?
Yes, you should
I'll come to the
use the
podium. So hello, everyone. I don't think I was introduced to begin with. I'm Stephanie DiPetrillo. It's really okay. I'm Stephanie DiPetrillo. I actually head the project here at the Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers. That project being the njtod.org website, who is the co-host of today's event. And really, all I want to do today is get questions from the audience. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, things that we didn't talk about. Anybody have something burning? Yes. And I'm going to ask you to speak up because I don't think we want to pass mics back.
Sure. So great topic. I think you guys did a great job covering everything. The one thing that really sticks to me that I've seen living in Metuchen and other communities in the state is walkability, right? So TOD is great, but if you don't have walkability in the community, you're almost neglecting the whole intent behind TOD development. So other than like certain amenities to create that vibe and to make it more walkable, thinking on the transit side of things, like has anyone had experience like introducing bikes to their project or scooters or something else that would make that particular development unit more walkable in a less walkable community?
Yeah, we bikes, zip cars, you can help create programming, with different areas of the community so that tenants are walking out into the community, and so there's multiple strategies to do that.
Michelle, do you want? Yeah, I was just going to say, Michelle, why don't you talk about
I
this?
was going to say, and the municipality also can do a lot. We have, a few years ago, we hired a transportation manager. He's a planner, but we combined his role in that he's in charge of the parking utility. We don't have an authority, we have a utility. But he's also in charge of transportation and finding transportation alternatives. Under him, his name is Mike Manzel, I'll give him his credit. We launched a bike share, and we're just put RFP out for scooter share. And that's essential for us to keep the car number down. And the other thing, on the zoning on the stick end, is to require bike storage. Not just bike racks, but even just bike storage, so that a tenant feels safe to have a bike at the apartment and will buy one, keep one, and use one. So we as a municipality have been very proactive, and I encourage, and we're also doing bike lanes. We only had one bike lane up until a few years ago. We did our bike ped plan. We're now, as road projects come along, we're striping the bike lanes in. Our sidewalks, we ensure that our sidewalks are beyond the minimum width. And then in the downtown area, we very heavily police that there's the clear 5 feet in the center. And why I bring that up, because retailers feel to be successful, they need a sandwich board sign. And of course, everyone wants tables and chairs, and that's great for a dynamic downtown, but you also have to ensure that people can actually walk around all this and push a stroller. And it's, of course, someone in a wheelchair as well has to have the ability to be able to use the sidewalks. So I agree with you, and some of that is on the municipality to make sure those items are in place, both on their end and also requiring developers to do certain things.
Yeah, I guess if I could put my planner hat on, that their development is just one little portion of a network. So, they could do all they want. You can't just put a bike lane right in front of one building, right? So it really is, the onus is on the municipality to plan ahead and then ask the developer to implement their part of this larger network and be a good player. But really, and you'll see once you start getting this denser development and you start getting these millennials in who want to walk, they're going to start getting angry when it is a dangerous walk, and then you're going to have, your Safe Streets organization coming out and saying, why aren't you doing anything? So really, if you're planning for density, you should be planning for walkability, and it's not, the onus can't be on the developer. It's really got to be a network approach.
And I'm just going to follow up, and it's also about creating a complete network, so that you can go everywhere within it, including getting to the transit amenity.
And
the park and the schools and everything.
I think you're fine, just to put a point from our perspective on, you'll find a lot of receptivity from our end, because we market the heck out of that stuff. So if we have available bike paths, available pedestrian access ways, we just built a connection down in Bayonne to the waterfront from our community. We just tied in two bike trails from 2 different towns as far as across our property and down the road a bit, because it works so well for us. We've struggled with bike share. We've looked at it. We find mostly in the communities, maybe just because our rents are a little bit, it's a higher end product, everybody's got a bike. So the 2 biggest issues in the apartment communities right now are packages, obviously, and bike storage. And I think the point Michelle made about compelling bike storage, both outdoor lockers, which we do, and indoor space is really, really important, because you don't want somebody who might otherwise bike say, oh, it's just too much of a hassle for me to have a bike here. I got to drag it up, and they don't let me put it on the balcony. I get yelled at. So if you make it easier, that's how I think we can contribute.
Yeah. And just to follow up, the reason I bring it up is that we're making the argument that, well, we can get you to 1.5 for parking, but then you end up not having enough parking, by nature of where the development is. If you're in a DOT designated area, you meet all those criteria essentially for a bikeable, walkable area. So having a network of bike lanes is not really necessarily a realistic expectation, because on a lot of our downtown roads don't need bike lanes, because the speed limit's already 25. You have on-street parking. You should be able to safely bike around or walk. So this is a tool to...
The word is should, but not every, and not everyone obeys the speed limit, because but I was also, one of the things I forgot to mention that we also have is we have a contract with a, we call it a jitney, but it's a big golf cart. And, what? Oh, no, we don't call it that, but, no, because the golf, and they'll take you, they're limited, and back onto the urban, they're limited on their speed limit, clearly as fast as they can go, so they shuttle people in our downtown to the beachfront, back to the train station, but what we want to do is our next step is have that for our neighborhoods not adjacent to the beach, and to service actual residents other than visitors to the beach. But I wanted to also stress back, again, I feel like a key thing for us was our combination that the head of our parking is a transportation planner. So while he's doing all the alternative transportation initiatives, he's looking at the parking in a different way, and it's not necessarily like we need more parking. He's also put in the variable meter rates based on season, time of day. So I want to emphasize that as well, we don't have a conflict where our transportation planner is battling our parking person, because that's one person.
I want to go to you next.
I was just following up on the sidewalk issue and the sandwich signs, which are a huge, everybody wants them, but they're very difficult because you've got a table and a sandwich in an existing town. What's your optimum sidewalk size to accommodate all of that, and then what can you do in downtowns that you can't recreate the sidewalks?
Well, I hope at least at a minimum in your downtown you have at least 8. What is your minimum sidewalk size in your downtown?
I think it's 8.
Because then you can combine, if you have the 5-foot clear, you can combine your tables and chairs, and there's not going to see, it's not going to be a large table with the area for the sandwich board sign. The key is the expectation of the restaurateur of how many tables they can have, but also the size of the signs as well. Because for some of our narrow streets, the so-called sandwich board sign is actually not a sandwich board, but a little sign on a pole.
Oh, okay.
So that helps with the narrow sidewalks, but it is difficult with some built situations. But so one of the things though as well that we've incorporated in some of the zoning is, if there's new construction and you think you're getting a restaurateur, or you're marking space as a restaurateur, leave a 10-foot setback. Again, that doesn't work for all retail, but if you definitely in your development think you have a space for a restaurateur, that's highly recommended. We have that in one building in our downtown, Taka, new construction, left huge patio in the front, and it's very populated spring, summer, and fall. Because he brings the heat lamps out, and that creates visual activity as well.
Did they set the whole building
Right.
back, or was
Yeah.
there an overhang?
Whole building, but he's a
Okay,
one,
so 10 feet times 200 feet of frontage, it's a lot of parking you just
Right.
killed, right? So East Orange, as an example, the sidewalk in front of the site we have is 10 feet. We have retail, right? We're right by the East Orange train station. So what we did in the design is we've incorporated, instead of traditional storefront doors, we're doing more of a garage grill type of roll-up door so that they can potentially have outdoor, experience without necessarily having tables on the sidewalk. So I think it's understanding kind of what your architectural design can allow for as well, and what you need inside the building. Because that's,
it worked for
right,
him.
sometimes you could set back a portion of the building,
Right.
sometimes, right, but the value of that space works for that concept plan. But it really has to be looked at in context of that block.
I don't want to cut anyone off, but I want to make sure I get to Jim.
Oh, well, just a quick comment on the narrow sidewalks. One of the things that's often overlooked is it's actually better to allow the tables and chairs to go curbside.
Right.
Because you're in the furnishing zone, so you have trees, you have signposts, lampposts, they fit in between. The issue will always come up, well, what happens when somebody needs to open their car door? This is the suburban mentality issue. You assure them in the history of human civilization that diners are moving apart, and that will occur 10,000 times tonight in Europe during dining hours. But also sometimes the view out there at the curbside is more interesting. It aids traffic calming. I actually have people sit curbside, but that becomes a big issue. Certain municipalities are hung up. That's in the public right-of-way. Yeah, ask the public what they think.
And I have to say, you have to make the permitting for those amenities in the right way easy.
$25.
And it can be done by ordinance, because many years ago, when I first worked for Jersey City, it was very uneasy. I had to get a franchise ordinance. In my tenure there, under Bob Carter, we changed that so that it was much more easier for a restaurateur to just go and, give a measurement, pay a fee, and get the tables and chairs. So that's essential.
We have another question?
What's the best way of addressing these concerns of the developer in the town? Is it the ordinance, is it too tight? Is it better to go to a developer's agreement?
It depends on the concern, which concern.
Any of them.
Well,
We're talking about a zoning ordinance that developers, I think, are saying is generally too strict. And then you have to work out parking, the sidewalk width, whatever, the signage ordinance.
The simple answer is a redevelopment zone with a redevelopment plan that you can totally tailor to the street, the block, what you're trying to achieve. It's a negotiation and a conversation ahead of time, rather than when you're in the field. And so it's...
Well, that's the question. Is the ordinance, are they becoming too cookie-cutter? Do they need to be more open?
Well, the thing is to always have an open door and not say no, and that's the key. No, open door as, municipal, it depends, because if it's a redevelopment plan or it's a regularly zoned area, because also it goes into, it's multiple discussions depending on the developer and the development. Like I said about the 10 feet, that wasn't mandated for that restaurant owner. That fit and worked for him. But it doesn't mandate that you have to have the outdoor seating. And I said, if you anticipate you're going to have a restaurant, and we sit down at the table and we talk about what are your needs and what works best. Same with, here's an example. We have a large-scale development coming online by the train station. The developer came to us as the municipality, said, I want to do this. I need support. We made it a redevelopment area. And worked with them. And again, like was said about the negotiation back and forth. What is important to us in the municipality, get out this development? What do they need to make this development happen? And of course, sometimes there are deal breakers. like retail in the plaza, it's a deal breaker also because we know it's not going to work.
How many redevelopment areas do you have?
Do we have 6?
I think the key of all this is that the developers and the municipalities need to work together, and there needs to be flexibility. And where developers aren't going to go are the municipalities that say, this is our ordinance, and this is what you can build, and that's it. And good luck if you want to try to do something different. And where you're going to thrive, particularly from TOD, is unique. It's more density. It's downtown. It's near transit. It's not your suburban sprawl. That's a whole different thing. If you want to tell your suburban single-family detached houses exactly what to do, by all means. But because you're in such an environment where you want to induce walkability, you want to induce a mix of uses, be flexible and say, because there might be some towns that say, no, you can't go that extra, you can't set that building back that extra 2 feet, 4 feet, because this is what our ordinance says. And now you've killed a potential use for that building. And I think that's what we wanted to get across here ultimately, is that you have to work together. It can't be black and white from either side.
So I think that.
There you go. Sorry, did I steal your?
No, a little bit, but that's basically was the thought about putting the panel together in the first place, was talking to people who have been in the trenches and have worked on one of the 2 sides in a collaborative way. I want to thank everyone who's come today, and to thank the panel. I want to give them a round of applause. And I thank Courtney Mercer for helping to set this up as well. NJDOT, did I say it wrong?
Oh, was that?
NJTOD.org, and downtown New Jersey.
Downtown New Jersey?
Yes. Sees this as the beginning of a series of panels that we would like to put together. We are soliciting additional ideas about what people would like to hear. We'll send out an email follow-up, and if you want to provide us with that kind of information, we would really appreciate it. Tell your friends and go to our websites. Yes.
And you're going to share today's panel so we can share with our public.
So we did tape, and we'll hope, our fingers are crossed, that the quality of the tape will be worth having somebody else listen to. And that information will also be shared with everyone. If the tape is good, which we're hoping for, it will actually be posted on our websites so that you'll be able to share it with other people. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good to see you.